I'd rather be the US than China. China's in even worse shape for different reasons. It's not so much interest rate policy, although they're subject to global interest rate policy and exchange rates coming from the Fed. But you can see it in real estate. It's a full-scale collapse. They're propping it up. But the buyers aren't interested in others. The Chinese government is telling the banks to lend money to real estate developers who can't finish housing. Well, that sounds good. It's like, okay, here's some money, finish the housing. But the buyers are not fucking in. The buyers have been burned. They're shying away from that asset class. They want to increase cash. They're looking at other asset classes. They don't have a lot of choices because China has very strict capital controls of trying to get their money out by means legal and illegal. They're buying gold when they can. But as I said, they may not have a lot of choices. But even money in the bank looks pretty good compared to what's going on in real estate. The problem is too big, the bubble is too large, has gone on for too long. We don't hear about it the same way we did about the Japanese real estate bubble in 1989, 1990. That was an epic crash. Japan is still not recovered. I remember in the 90s, early 2000s, they talked about the last decade. We'll try 3 last decades. That's in going into a 4th. That's Japan, 8 or last cash, 8 or 9 recessions since 1989. It's really just one long depression as a way to understand the Japanese economy. China's going into something like that. We don't hear much about it because they're not transparent. They lie about their numbers. You need to look at private sources and other analytic tools to understand what's going on there. But they've got drops in consumption, industrial output, real estate is collapsing. The price indices are collapsing. Listen for pure of inflation. Spin around is real, but is now turning around very quickly. And you can see that in China. China's gone through something that the world has never seen. They're going to lose 600 million people in the next 50 to 70 years. This is a demographic implosion. This is worse than the Black Death. Because the Black Death killed somewhere between a third and half the population of Europe in the 14th century. It was good time for labor. By the way, the labor was so scarce, the returns to labor went up versus returns to capital because there weren't enough workers. But that's the only thing that can come close. Even the Spanish flu of 1919 killed about no one certain of the number. Between 100 million and maybe over 200 million people, that 30 years war was certainly, the early 17th century was certainly highly destructive. But what's going on in China now is worse than any of those things, has to do with math, simple demographic math. The key number is 2.12. People have to produce 2.1 children, and men and women are being sick per woman. If you're the one have to produce 2.1 children to keep the population constant, why not to 1 or 2 producing 2? The answer is infant mortality and those who don't make it to adulthood and can continue the repopulation of the planet, if you will. But they're not even close to that. They're well below 2 brothers, so as the rest of the world. So as Australia and the US and Western Europe and a lot of other places, this is a global phenomenon. But it's particularly acute in China. Maybe the case that China's replacement rate or birth rate is actually has to be 2.1. To maintain it could be 1 or lower. This is a demographic implosion unlike anything anyone's ever seen. It also has a dynamic. You can't reverse it very quickly. It feeds on itself, as I was talking about inflation earlier. So this is going to continue for 50 to 75 years. They're going to lose 600 million people. There are a lot of definitions of GDP and a 4 or 5 part definition or more complex calculations. But there's one really simple definition that only has 2 factors, population and productivity. How many people are working and how productive are they? That's nominal GDP. That's one definition of gross GDP or nominal GDP. Well, if your population is dropping from 1.4 billion to 800 million, you're losing 600 million people. And then what about productivity? Well, the other thing that's going on is China's population is aging very quickly. So you get a population set people in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with very large amounts of cognitive decline, dementia. Obviously, there's no productivity there. But it's worse than that because then you look at the shrinking population between the ages of 25 and 54. It's called their prime working age. More and more of those people are going to have to be involved in elder care. They're going to have to be basically caretakers or caregivers. For the older population I described, a very worthy a job, but not one that lends itself to productivity gains. Bathing hasn't changed in about 5,000 years. Robots don't do best. The only real innovation in bathing in between 1870 and 1940, we did see the rise of indoor plumbing and hot water. That's good. I enjoyed both, but that's it. I can't think of any other bathing innovations in the last several millennia. So if you have a shrinking working age population, a rising older population, high degree of cognitive decline, and a big slice of the working age population having to provide elder care or be caregivers for the older population, tell me where your industrial output is coming from. Tell me where your productivity is coming from and serve. I mentioned this already, but 50% of the water in China is poisoned because of just their industrial practices. The Pura gold mine, you're in Australia and I invest in gold mines around the world. I know that places like Canada, the US and Australia, if you use cyanide to leach the gold, and that's a very common technique. You have to account for every, microgram, whatever you put in, you got to take out, weigh it, dispose of it properly. In China, they just dump it into the rivers, and so the rivers are poison. So China is an economic, demographic, industrial, moral, religious wasteland and will suffer. It's already in a recession, just to cut to the chase. Again, they lie about their statistics. So here you have the two largest economies in the world, US and China. US is slowly going into what I expect will be a severe recession. China is in a century-long decline, unlike one that the world has ever seen. That could eventually lead to social unrest and regime change. But let's not count on that. In the short run, just expect China to shrink and become more autarkic, decoupled from the Western world, and certainly not be a source of growth. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, the largest and most sophisticated semiconductor manufacturing in the world of semiconductors, really everything. It's not just computers or 2,400 semiconductors in an automobile. There's a semiconductor or more in your dishwasher, your refrigerator, your washing machine. They're everywhere. Internet of Things. We all understand that. So TSMC, based in Taiwan, the United States has military doctrine called the broken nest theory. And what it says is that if China, while it's coming from a Chinese proverb, ironically, and it says, if the nest is broken, how can the egg survive? And what it means is that if China invades Taiwan, I'm not forecasting innovation could happen though. The Taiwanese will very quickly destroy all the semiconductor manufacturers in Taiwan. Will just blow them up. And China won't get anything. They'll have the broken nest. Taiwan Semiconductor knows this. They talk to the US intelligence and military community all the time. They've just announced 2 separate $10 billion plus investments in Arizona for semiconductor fabrication plants, so-called Fabs. Intel do the same thing. $10 billion plus 3 to 5 year horizon. Fab they're building in Oregon or Washington over in northwestern United States. Why are Intel and TSMC putting over $30 billion into 2 fabs in the United States? Can you get cheaper labor in China? Yeah, these things are not going into Taiwan. They're not going into China. Is an example of the decoupling of the College of Nations. I'm talking about the building them in the United States. A little more expensive, yes, but more robust. Shorten the supply chain, shorten the transportation lanes, put it into a rule of law society, do everything you can. Everything you need to do to make it safe. And that's what's going on. And Australia will be a big part of that. It will have very important, already does, but will have more important relations and transportation channels to the United States. Not so much with China for the reasons I mentioned.
It's clear that while both the United States and China face significant economic challenges, the situation in China appears to be far more dire. The Chinese real estate market is in a state of collapse, consumer confidence is dwindling, and demographic issues are leading to a long-term decline that will affect their economy for decades. The population is aging rapidly, and the younger workforce is shrinking, which will severely impact productivity and economic growth. Environmental degradation further compounds these issues, making the situation even more unsustainable. On the other hand, the United States, despite its own economic hurdles, seems better positioned to navigate these challenges. The recent strategic moves, such as investments in semiconductor manufacturing within its borders, reflect a broader trend of decoupling from China and securing critical industries. This decoupling is not just economic but also geopolitical, as the U.S. seeks to bolster its own supply chains and reduce dependence on Chinese manufacturing. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, please like and subscribe for more in-depth discussions on global economic trends and their implications.